The smell of burnt sugar filled my parents' dining room, but it wasn't coming from any of my baking experiments. It was the acrid stench of another one of my dreams going up in flames. I'm Sawyer, and I've spent 29 years watching my younger brother's half-baked schemes get served up with a heaping side of parental approval, while my own ambitions got tossed in the trash. A bakery? My father's fork clattered against his plate. You want to throw away your finance career to sell cupcakes? It's not just cupcakes, Dad. I straightened my spine, gripping my water glass to keep my hands from shaking. I've done the market research. There's no artisanal bakery in this part of town, and with my business background. Speaking of business, my mother cut in, beaming at my brother across the table. Kyson, tell your sister about your new venture. Kyson lounged back in his chair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. It's gonna be huge. We're talking cryptocurrency meets social media meets. Mom, Dad, please. I set down my glass before I could crack it. I didn't come here for Kyson's elevator pitch. I came to tell you I'm using my bonus to open Sweet Victory Bakery. Honey. Mom reached across the table, her fingers brushing my wrist. We know you love baking, but it's just a hobby. Kyson's new platform could revolutionize. Like his dating app revolutionized things? The words shot out before I could stop them. Or his subscription box service, or his... Those were learning experiences, Dad snapped. At least your brother has vision. You're talking about throwing away a 6-figure salary to play Betty Crocker. I'm not playing at anything. I pulled out my phone, pulling up the business plan I'd spent months perfecting. Look at these projections. I've already found the perfect location and my friend Tiara. Your bonus could really help Kyson get his new venture off the ground, Mom said softly. Family should support family. I looked at Kyson, who was typing away on his phone, probably tweeting about his next big thing. He hadn't even bothered to ask what kind of bakery I wanted to open. You're right, Mom. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Family should support family. That's why I came here tonight, hoping you'd finally support me. Sawyer, sit down, Dad ordered. We're not finished discussing this. Actually, we are. I grabbed my purse. I signed the lease this morning. The bonus is already in escrow. You what? Mom's face went pale. Without consulting us? I'm 29 years old. I don't need consultation to invest my own money in my own dream. Kyson finally looked up from his phone. Come on, Saw. Don't be dramatic. Just hear me out about my project. It's guaranteed to fail? I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. Like everything else you've tried? The difference is, I've been planning this for years. I've been taking night classes in business management. I've been apprenticing with Bo at his bakery every weekend. I'm not jumping into this blind. You're making a mistake, Dad said, his voice hard. When this fails, I corrected, and if it does, I'll handle it myself, just like I've handled everything else. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. You know what the funny thing is? I actually thought you'd be proud of me for once, for having the courage to chase my dream instead of just talking about it. Sawyer, Mom started, the bakery opens in 6 weeks. You're all welcome to come. I pulled open the door, but only if you're ready to actually taste what I'm capable of. The door clicked shut behind me, and I stood on the porch, letting the cool evening air dry the tears I refused to shed. My phone buzzed. A text from Kiara. How'd it go? I typed back. Exactly as expected. Meet me at Bo's? Her response was immediate. On my way, first round of stress baking is on me. Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. Maybe it was because I'd finally stood up to them, or maybe it was because, for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for permission to be myself. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. Sweet Victory Bakery wasn't just going to be a business. It was going to be proof that sometimes the best revenge is served fresh from the oven, with a sprinkle of success on top. 6 weeks flew by in a blur of flour, sugar, and sleepless nights. Opening day at Sweet Victory Bakery arrived with the smell of fresh croissants and nervous energy. "These display cases are spotless," Bridget said, adjusting a tray of raspberry Danish. "I've cleaned them 3 times already." "Make it 4," I replied, rearranging macarons for the 10th time. "Everything has to be perfect." Tira burst through the back door, holding a massive bouquet. "First delivery of the day. Card says it's from Beau." I plucked the card from the flowers. "To the newest baker on the block. Show them what you're made of. That man's a saint." The bell above the door chimed, and my heart stopped. But it wasn't my family, just our first customer. Then another, and another. By noon, the display cases were half empty, and Bridget was starting a third batch of chocolate croissants. The lunch rush brought in curious office workers, and word of mouth did the rest. "Your sourdough is incredible," an elderly woman told me, clutching her paper bag. "I haven't tasted bread like this since I left Europe." I was boxing up her order when my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Kyson's big announcement tonight. Family dinner at 7. Don't be late." "Everything okay?" Kiara asked, noticing my expression. "Family dinner tonight. Kyson's announcing his new venture." "On your opening day? That's not a coincidence." "Of course it's not." I handed the box to the customer. "But I'm going anyway. They need to see I can do both. Run this place and still show up for family." The rest of the afternoon passed in a whirlwind of customers and compliments. At 6:30, I changed out of my flour-dusted clothes and headed to my parents' house, bringing a box of our best-selling items. I walked in to find Kyson holding court in the living room, laptop open on the coffee table. "Perfect timing, sis." He waved me over. "I'm just showing Mom and Dad the projection slides." "How was your bakery's first day?" Mom asked, but her eyes never left Kyson's screen. "It was—" "Look at these numbers," Kyson interrupted, pointing at his laptop. "We're talking serious ROI within the first quarter. I just need some seed money to get it off the ground." Dad nodded approvingly. "How much are we talking?" 200,000, but it's practically guaranteed." 200,000? I nearly dropped the pastry box. That's more than double what I invested in my entire bakery. "This is different," Dad said dismissively. "This is a tech startup. The potential return is exponential." I set the box on the coffee table. "I brought some samples from today. We sold out of almost everything, but I saved these for you." Mom glanced at the box. "That's nice, dear. Kyson, tell us more about the user interface." I watched as they fawned over Kyson's PowerPoint presentation, complete with buzzwords and pie charts that made no sense. The pastries sat untouched. "We've already committed to backing him," Dad announced proudly. "Your mother and I are liquidating some investments." "Your what?" I stood up so fast my head spun. "After all his failed ventures?" "Failed?" Kyson scoffed. "They were learning experiences. This time it's different. I've got investors lined up." "Then why do you need Mom and Dad's money?" "Because they believe in me." He slammed his laptop shut. "Unlike some people." "I believe in reality," I shot back. "And the reality is, I just opened a successful business with less than half of what you're asking for." "A cute little bakery isn't exactly disrupting the tech industry," he sneered. "No, it's just feeding actual people and turning an actual profit on day one." Mom stood between us. "That's enough. Sawyer, if you can't be supportive—" "Supportive?" I laughed. "Like you were this morning when you couldn't even show up to my opening?" The room fell silent. I picked up the untouched pastry box. "You know what? Keep the money in the family. But when this falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me." It won't fall apart, Dad insisted. Your brother has a real vision this time. So do I said quietly. But you'd have to actually visit my bakery to see it. I walked out again, but this time I wasn't sad. I was angry and determined. My phone buzzed. Bridget sending me tomorrow's pre-orders. We were already booked solid for custom cakes through the next month. I typed back, get ready for an early morning. We're going to show this town what a cute little bakery can do. Let Kyson have his parents' money and approval. I had something better, a real business, built with my own hands, that was already proving them all wrong. 3 months after opening day, I was elbow deep in cookie dough when Bridget rushed into the kitchen, eyes wide. Your parents are here, she whispered. They're standing in the middle of the morning rush, looking confused. I wiped my hands on my apron. Of course they show up during our busiest time. The line stretched out the door, our new normal since the local paper had featured us last week. Mom and Dad stood awkwardly near the register, taking in the exposed brick walls and the constant stream of customers clutching coffee cups and pastry bags. Welcome to Sweet Victory, I said, stepping behind the counter. First time here? Mom's eyes darted around the packed cafe. We were in the neighborhood. The neighborhood you haven't visited in 3 months? I started boxing up a selection of our best sellers. Try the lavender honey scones. They're why we had the TV crew here yesterday. TV crew? Dad's head snapped up. Local morning show. They're doing a segment on successful new businesses. I handed them the box. On the house. Before they could respond, Kira called from the register. Sawyer, the wedding consultation is here. Wedding consultation? Mom echoed. We're doing 3 wedding cakes this weekend. I gestured to the portfolio on the counter. We're booked solid through summer now. Excuse me, I have customers waiting. I spent the next hour walking a bride through cake designs while watching my parents from the corner of my eye. They sat at a corner table, picking at their pastries and watching the constant flow of customers. Is that really your parents? The bride asked, following my gaze. My mom says she has to make reservations just to get your weekend brunch pastry boxes now. They must be so proud. I forced a smile. You'd think so, wouldn't you? Just then, Kyson burst through the door, face flushed. He barely acknowledged our parents before making a beeline for me. We need to talk, he hissed, privately. I'm with a client. It's important. I apologized to the bride and followed Kyson to the back office. He closed the door and started pacing. The investors pulled out, he blurted. All of them, the whole thing's falling apart. The guaranteed success? The exponential returns? Don't. He ran his hands through his hair. The development team hit some snags and costs are spiraling. Mom and Dad's investment, it's almost gone. I leaned against my desk, letting that sink in. How much is almost? Like, all of it. He wouldn't meet my eyes. And there might be some other debts? Jesus, Kyson. I pushed away from the desk. How bad? Bad enough that Mom and Dad might lose their... A knock interrupted us. Bridget poked her head in. Sorry, but the health inspector is here for our quarterly check, and the local business association wants to talk about featuring us in their holiday campaign. Be right there. I turned back to Kyson. We'll discuss this later. There might not be a later. The creditors are... Should I tell Mom and Dad about this conversation? His face paled. No, they don't know how bad it is yet. I was hoping maybe you could... Could what? Bail you out? With my cute little bakery money? Sawyer, please, I'm desperate here. I opened the door. So was I every time I needed support. Funny how things turn out, isn't it? Back in the main room, Mom and Dad were still at their table, watching me with new eyes as I guided the health inspector through our spotless kitchen. They saw the respect in his nods. heard the pride in my staff's voices as they explained our procedures. Perfect score again, the inspector announced, signing off on his forms. Keep up the excellent work. Mom stood up as I passed their table. Sawyer, we had no idea. No, you didn't. I straightened a display of fresh croissants. Because you never bothered to look. Your brother, Dad started, will probably be asking for your help again soon. I met their eyes. Maybe this time think carefully about where you invest your trust. They left shortly after, taking their half-eaten pastries with them. Through the window, I watched them talk intensely in the parking lot, probably about Kyson's latest disaster. Ciara appeared at my shoulder. You okay? Better than okay. I picked up a piping bag. We've got orders to fill, a business to run, and success to bake. And Kyson's problems? I started piping delicate roses onto a celebration cake. Let's just say karma comes in all flavors. Some are just sweeter than others. The afternoon sun streamed through our windows, catching on the gold lettering that spelled out Sweet Victory Bakery. Outside, another line was forming for our afternoon tea service. Inside, I was finally serving up the one thing my family had never given me, respect, and it tasted better than any revenge I could have planned. The family ambush came on a Tuesday afternoon, right as I was finishing a batch of macarons. Mom, Dad, and Kyson filed into my office like a funeral procession, with Kyson looking particularly grave. We need to talk, Dad said, closing the door. I'm busy. I kept piping. We have a corporate event tomorrow. Please, Mom's voice cracked. This is important. I set down the piping bag. More important than my last 3 dinner invitations that you all skipped? This is serious, Kyson stepped forward. The creditors are threatening legal action. They're talking about putting liens on Mom and Dad's house. And this is my problem because you're the only one who can help, Kyson exploded. Your bakery's doing great. Everyone knows it. The local papers, the TV spots. So now my cute little bakery matters? I crossed my arms. Now that you need something? Dad cleared his throat. We were wrong, okay? We should have supported you from the start. Should have? I laughed. You actively tried to stop me. You wanted me to give my money to him. I pointed at Kyson, for what turned out to be another failure. I know I messed up, Kyson said quietly, but Mom and Dad shouldn't lose their house because of me. They shouldn't have invested money they couldn't afford to lose. Sawyer, Mom stepped closer, tears in her eyes. We're not just asking for money. We're asking for your help, your business expertise. You've proven you know what you're doing. Now I have expertise. 3 months ago, I was playing Betty Crocker. A knock interrupted us. Bridget opened the door. Sorry, but the magazine photographer is here for the Top 30 Under 30 shoot. Tell them I'll be right there. Top 30 Under 30? Dad's eyebrows shot up. Regional Business Magazine. I straightened my apron. Turns out selling cupcakes can be pretty prestigious when you do it right. Kyson slumped against the wall. So you won't help? I studied my brother, really looked at him for the first time in months. His designer clothes were wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. He looked beaten. I didn't say that. Hope flickered across his face. Really? I'll think about it. But if, and that's a big if, I help, it'll be on my terms. Anything, Mom said quickly. Whatever you want. I want a family meeting. Tomorrow night, here at the bakery, after closing. I picked up my piping bag again. I'll lay out my conditions then. Conditions? Dad frowned. Did you think I'd just write a check and forget how you've treated me for years? I started piping again. This isn't charity, it's business. But, Kyson started. Tomorrow at 8. I cut him off. Don't be late, and come hungry. I'm testing new recipes for the fall menu. They filed out, shoulders slumped but with a hint of hope. Through my office window, I watched them cross the parking lot, huddled together like survivors of a storm. Ciara slipped in as they left. That looked intense. They want my help with Kyson's mess. And you're considering it? She raised an eyebrow. After everything? I'm considering making them earn it. I finished the last macaron. Remember that contract template your lawyer sister sent over? The partnership agreement? That's the one. Can you get me a copy? I need to make some modifications. Ciara's eyes widened. You're not seriously thinking of making Kyson a partner? No. I smiled. I'm thinking of making him learn what real business looks like, from the ground up. You're going to make him work here? If he wants my help, he's going to learn every aspect of running a successful business, starting with morning prep at 4 a.m. Bridget popped her head in. The photographer's waiting. Coming? I stood up, brushing flour from my apron. Oh, and Bridget, clear the schedule for tomorrow night. We're hosting a very special family dinner. Should I make your famous revenge cake? She grinned. No. I straightened my shoulders. Make the humble pie, extra humble. As I walked to meet the photographer, I caught my reflection in the bakery window. I saw someone I barely recognized, not the shadow of my younger brother, but a successful business owner about to teach her family a lesson in respect. Tomorrow night, I'd serve up a slice of reality with a side of consequences, and this time, they'd have no choice but to take a bite. At exactly 8 o'clock, my family sat around one of our rustic wooden tables, staring at the spread before them. I'd laid out a feast, everything that had made Sweet Victory famous in just 3 months. Before we discuss terms, I said, sliding into my seat, let's talk numbers. How bad is it really, Kyson? He pulled out a crumpled stack of papers. 243,000. That's more than Mom and Dad invested, I noted. There were additional loans. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Personal guarantees. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. Personal guarantees. You said the investment was secured. Can we focus on solutions? Mom pleaded, reaching for a cheese Danish with trembling fingers. That's why we're here. I pulled out 3 manila envelopes. My terms. Kyson grabbed for an envelope, but I held them back. First, eat. Everything on this table represents what actual success looks like. I want you to taste what you've been dismissing. They ate in silence. I watched their faces as they tried each item. The sourdough that took me 6 months to perfect, the croissants that required 3 days of preparation, the signature cake that had won us our first wedding contract. This is, Dad swallowed hard. This is incredible, Sawyer. I know. I slid the envelopes across the table. Now, let's talk about how we fix your mess. They opened the envelopes. Mom gasped. Kyson's face went pale. You want me to work here? He sputtered. As a trainee? 6 months, minimum wage, starting with morning prep at 4 a.m. I tapped the contract. You'll learn every aspect of running a real business. No shortcuts, no excuses. But my tech career is over, I finished. At least until you pay back every penny you owe. And us? Dad asked, reviewing his paper. You'll both take small business management classes at the community college, the same ones I took while working full-time, and you'll spend 1 shift per week here, seeing what your daughter built while you weren't looking. These terms are ridiculous, Kyson protested. More ridiculous than losing your parents' house? I leaned forward. More ridiculous than watching them liquidate their retirement to fund your fantasy? Mom wiped her eyes. We'll do it. Margaret, Dad started. No, Henry, look around. She gestured at the bakery. Our daughter built this while we were too busy enabling Kyson's failures. We owe her this much. There's more, I said, pulling out another document. Once the debt is paid and if, big if, Kyson completes his training successfully, I'll consider taking him on as a junior partner in a new venture. Kyson's head snapped up. New venture? I'm planning to expand, a second location, maybe a wholesale operation, but only with someone who understands real business, not get-rich-quick schemes. And the money? Dad asked quietly. How much can you? I'll cover the debts. I slid over a cashier's check, but only after all three of you sign these contracts. Break them, and I'll demand immediate repayment. Kyson stared at the contract, then at the bustling bakery around us. You really start at 4 a.m.? Sharp. Bridget will train you. She's strict, by the way, doesn't tolerate excuses. And the business classes? Mom asked. Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I've already enrolled you both. Bo, my mentor, teaches some of them. They sat in silence, reading through the terms. Finally, Dad reached for a pen. You're either brilliant or cruel, he said, signing his name. I learned from the best. I watched as Mom and Kyson signed too. Welcome to the real world of business, family. Hope you like the taste of humble pie. When do we start? Kyson asked, already looking uncomfortable. You? Tomorrow morning. Don't be late. Bridget hates that. I gathered the signed contracts. Mom, Dad, your first class is next week. I expect full attendance and completed homework. As they prepared to leave, Mom paused. We really are proud of you, Sawyer. We should have said it sooner. Actions speak louder than words, I replied. Show me with your commitment to these terms. After they left, Kira emerged from the kitchen. Think they'll actually follow through? They better. I looked at the signed contracts. Because this is their last chance to prove they see me as more than just Kyson's big sister. And if they fail, I smiled, sliding the contracts into my safe. Then they'll learn what I already know. Success tastes sweetest when you earn it yourself. Through the window, I watched them drive away, their faces still processing the evening's events. Tomorrow would be Kyson's first 4 a.m. wake-up call and my parents' first step toward understanding what their daughter had achieved. Let the lessons begin. 2 weeks into our new arrangement, I arrived at 3:45 a.m. to find Kyson already waiting outside. Dark circles under his eyes, but on time for once. Bridget's been making me come 15 minutes early, he mumbled, suppressing a yawn. Says if I'm not early, I'm late. Smart woman. I unlocked the door. Ready to learn laminated dough today? I still have burns from yesterday's lesson. Those aren't burns, I laughed. They're badges of honor. Wait until you start working with caramel. Inside, Bridget was already setting up the prep stations. She'd taken to training Kyson with a drill sergeant's precision, and surprisingly, he hadn't quit yet. Your brother's getting better, she whispered as Kyson tied on his apron. He only ruined one batch of brioche yesterday. The morning proceeded smoothly until Bo walked in through the back door, carrying a stack of folders. Quarterly supplier reviews, he announced, then stopped short at the sight of Kyson covered in flour. Well, look who finally joined the real world. You know each other? I asked. Oh, we go way back. Bo set down the folders. Your brother here tried to get me to invest in 3 different schemes. What was the last one? The social media thing for pets? Kyson's face reddened. It was a revolutionary platform. It was a mess, Bo cut in. Just like the dating app and the subscription box service. I tried to warn your parents, but they wouldn't listen. I froze in the middle of scoring croissants. You warned them? Multiple times. Bo crossed his arms. Showed them the market research, the flawed business plans, everything. They said I just didn't understand modern business. The scoring knife clattered onto the counter. They knew? They knew his businesses were doomed? They chose to believe what they wanted to believe. Bo shrugged. Just like they chose not to see what was right in front of them with you. Kyson stared at the floor, hands covered in dough. I didn't know you tried to warn them. Of course you didn't. Bo picked up a rolling pin. You were too busy chasing unicorns to see the real opportunities around you. Like this place. He gestured at the bakery. Your sister built this while you were playing entrepreneur. The morning rush prep continued in tense silence. At 6, Mom arrived for her weekly shift, looking more comfortable in her bakery apron than I'd expected. The regulars are starting to know my name, she said proudly, then noticed the atmosphere. What's wrong? Ask Bo, I said quietly. About all those warnings he gave you about Kyson's ventures. Mom's smile faded. Sawyer, we can explain. Can you? I checked the proofing drawer. Can you explain why you ignored professional advice about Kyson, but couldn't even show up to my opening day? We thought, she trailed off. You thought he needed you more, Bo finished. But he needed you to say no, and Sawyer needed you to say yes. The first customers would arrive soon. I turned to Kyson, who hadn't moved from his workstation. Start the coffee prep, I ordered. Mom, get the display cases ready. We'll discuss this later. But as the morning progressed, watching them work, really work, for the first time in their lives, something shifted. Kyson's hands were steady as he worked the espresso machine. Mom's voice was confident as she explained our pastry selection to customers. During the mid-morning lull, Bo pulled me aside. They're learning, he said. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from watching someone else succeed. I'm not sure I can forgive them, I admitted, for knowing the truth and still choosing his failures over my success. Maybe that's not the point. Bo nodded toward Kyson, who was carefully crafting his first latte art. Maybe the point is making sure they never make the same mistake again. The morning rush picked up again, and I watched my family move through the choreography of the bakery. They were different people than they'd been 2 weeks ago, humbler, harder working, finally understanding what it meant to build something real. My phone buzzed. Dad sending his completed homework from his business class, asking for feedback. Another text followed. Your professor said my analysis of Sweet Victory's business model was spot on. I'm starting to understand what you built here. I typed back, understanding is just the beginning. Wait until you see what's next. Because that's the thing about real success. It's not about revenge or proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right over and over until even the doubters have to believe. And watching my family finally learn that lesson, that was sweeter than any revenge I could have planned. 1 month later, I called an emergency family meeting. The bakery was closed, but the lights blazed as I spread documents across our largest table. Is everything okay? Mom asked, sliding into her seat. You sounded serious on the phone. Just wait. I checked my watch. Kyson should be here any... The door chimed. Kyson rushed in, still in his flour-dusted uniform from the morning shift. Sorry I'm late. The wholesale orders took longer than expected. Sit down, I said, pushing a folder toward each of them. We need to talk about what Bo told me. Dad's face fell. Sawyer, we can explain. No. I held up my hand. I've been doing some digging, going through old records, talking to Bo, checking with the business registry. I pulled out a stack of papers. You didn't just ignore his warnings. You mortgaged the house 3 times to fund Kyson's ventures. Mom started crying. You thought he'd succeed eventually, I finished, while actively sabotaging his chances by never making him face consequences. That's not fair, Dad protested. No? I spread out more documents. What about the time you pulled money from my college fund for his first startup? Or when you convinced Aunt Linda to invest her savings in his dating app? Kyson's head snapped up. You used Sawyer's college fund? We paid it back, Dad mumbled. With what? I demanded, The money you should have been saving for retirement? The equity from your house? The loans you're still paying off? The silence was deafening. Outside, the street was dark and empty, but inside, years of secrets were finally coming to light. I had no idea, Kyson whispered, about any of this, because they protected you from reality. I turned to our parents, and in doing so, they hurt everyone, including you. Mom wiped her eyes. We just wanted to help? I laughed bitterly. Look where that got us. A mountain of debt, a house in jeopardy, and a son who never learned to stand on his own feet. Until now, Kyson said quietly. He pulled out his own papers, daily sales reports from his shifts, customer feedback, even a rough business plan. I've been learning, Sawyer, really learning. These past weeks have shown me what I was doing wrong all along. Show them, I nodded toward our parents. Kyson spread out his work. Every failed venture, I was chasing shortcuts, but here? He gestured around the bakery. Everything takes time, preparation, attention to detail. You can't rush perfection. Dad picked up one of Kyson's reports. You did all this analysis yourself? Bridget's been teaching me. Did you know our morning prep schedule is synchronized to maximize oven efficiency? Or that each recipe is tested 30 times before it goes on the menu? That's what real business looks like, I said, not PowerPoint presentations and empty promises. We were wrong, Mom admitted, about everything. The way we treated you, the way we enabled Kyson. The question is, I leaned forward, what are you going to do about it? Dad straightened in his chair. We'll sell the house, pay off the debts ourselves. No. I pulled out one final document. You're going to let me help, the right way this time. What do you mean? Sweet Victory is expanding. We're opening a second location. I slid the paper across the table. If you all agree to continue your training, to work as hard as you have been, I'll handle the debts. But this time, we do it as a real family business. You trust us? Kyson asked. After everything? I trust the people you're becoming, I corrected. The ones who show up at 4 a.m., who do the hard work, who finally understand what it means to build something real. Mom reached for the document with trembling hands. We don't deserve this chance. No, you don't. But that's what family does. Gives chances to those who earn them. And you're finally earning it. Kyson stood up suddenly, walking to the window. The Sweet Victory sign cast a warm glow on his face. I want to run the new location, he said. Not as the boss, as a student. Learning from the ground up, doing it right this time. That's the first smart business decision you've ever made, I smiled. We spent the next hour going over plans, real plans, built on hard work and honest numbers. As my family signed the new agreements, I saw something I'd never seen before. Respect in their eyes, not just for my success, but for the path that led here. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in proving people wrong, but in helping them become right. The morning of the second location's opening, I stood in the new kitchen, watching Kyson teach our parents the proper way to laminate croissant dough. No, Mom, you need to fold it exactly 3 times, he demonstrated. Remember what Bridget taught us. Precision matters. Like this, Mom's hands were steady as she created perfect layers. Exactly. He beamed. Now you're getting it. Dad checked the proofing drawer temperatures, making notes in the logbook he'd designed himself. His business classes had awakened a passion for systems optimization that none of us had expected. The delivery truck's here, Tiara called from the back door. First wholesale order for the new location. I've got it, Kyson said, wiping his hands. That's my department now. I watched him confidently direct the delivery, checking every item against his meticulous spreadsheet. No shortcuts, no grandiose promises, just honest, careful work. Remember when he couldn't even work the register? Bridget appeared beside me, grinning. Now look at him. Look at all of them, I said. The new location gleamed, ready for its first customers. But more impressive than the shiny equipment and fresh paint was the transformation of my family. Bo walked in through the front door, carrying his signature opening day flowers. Place looks perfect. You ready for the ribbon cutting? Almost. I turned to my family. First, I need to show you something. I led them to the front of the store, where a large frame hung covered by a cloth. With a deep breath, I pulled the fabric away. There, beautifully displayed, was the original Sweet Victory business plan I'd presented at that fateful family dinner. The one they'd dismissed. Beside it hung the newspaper articles, awards, and photos documenting our success. And below them all, a new sign. Sweet Victory South, managed by Kyson Grant. Sawyer! Kyson's voice cracked. You've earned this, I said. All of you have. Mom touched the frame gently. I wish we could go back and do it differently. We can't, I replied, but we can do better going forward. The mayor arrived for the ribbon cutting, along with local press and a crowd of eager customers. As cameras flashed, I handed the scissors to Kyson. This is your moment, I said. You built this location from the ground up, the right way this time. He shook his head. We built it together. He offered me the other handle of the scissors. Family business, remember? As we cut the ribbon together, I saw tears in Dad's eyes. Not the disappointed ones I'd grown used to, but proud ones, finally seeing both his children succeeding on their own terms. The morning rush was intense, but my family moved like a well-oiled machine. Kyson expedited orders with calm efficiency. Mom charmed customers with genuine warmth. Dad's organizational systems kept everything running smoothly. During a brief lull, Bo pulled me aside. You know, revenge would have been easier than redemption. Easier, maybe. I watched Kyson patiently training a new employee, but not sweeter. The day flew by in a blur of customers and congratulations. As we closed up, my family gathered around a table, sharing leftover pastries and stories from the day. Remember my first morning shift? Kyson laughed. I nearly set the kitchen on fire. Remember our first business class presentation? Dad added. We were so nervous. Remember when we thought a bakery was just selling cupcakes? Mom smiled at me. We were wrong about so many things. But you learned, I said. That's what matters. Kyson raised his coffee cup. To Sweet Victory, both locations. To family, Dad added, and second chances. To doing things the right way, Mom chimed in. I looked around at my family, really looked at them. The arrogance was gone from Kyson's eyes, replaced by earned confidence. The dismissiveness had vanished from my parents' faces, transformed into genuine respect. To all of it, I said, raising my cup. The failures that taught us, the success we built, and the family we became. Through the windows, both Sweet Victory signs glowed in the evening darkness, beacons of what we'd built together. Not just successful businesses, but a stronger family, forged in the heat of early morning ovens and tempered by hard-earned wisdom. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in proving your worth to others, but in helping them discover their own. And as I watched my family close up their new bakery, their real achievement, I knew we'd all finally learned that lesson. The revenge I'd planned had turned into redemption, and that was the sweetest success of all.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carol, now 51 years old, living a life tinged with unforeseen challenges that began unfolding a couple of years ago. After turning 50, I was diagnosed with menopause, marking the onset of a series of relentless symptoms, dizziness, palpitations, and intense hot flashes among them. Although I'm under medical care, the treatments have only managed to alleviate these symptoms slightly. A cure seems elusive. Living under the same roof, my husband Anthony, who is 4 years my senior, has witnessed my struggles firsthand. Yet, understanding and empathy from him have been painfully absent. His recent outburst was particularly disheartening. As I struggled to stand, dizzy and weak, he accused me of using my condition as an excuse to avoid work and household duties. "Wow, I'm jealous," he scoffed, implying that my medically advised leave of absence was merely an exploitation of what he perceived to be a trivial ailment. Anthony and I met through mutual friends in our late 20s and clicked almost immediately. Our relationship evolved smoothly into marriage in our early 30s. While we've had our share of minor squabbles, life was largely peaceful, and Anthony seemed supportive. We dedicated ourselves to our careers, opting not to have children, and I believed we had grown close and supportive as a couple. However, the dynamic between us began to shift dramatically as I approached my late 40s. Initially, the signs were subtle: irregular menstrual cycles and sudden bouts of heat and exhaustion. But as time went on, these symptoms intensified. Severe palpitations disrupted my nights, and sleeplessness became a frequent tormentor. The physical ailments began to erode my mental well-being, leaving me irritable and despondent without cause. The journey through menopause is often misunderstood, spanning roughly a decade, with symptoms fluctuating before and after the cessation of menstrual cycles. Despite living through this difficult time, Anthony's recent comments have only deepened the divide between us, highlighting a lack of compassion that has reshaped the contours of our marriage. Experiencing menopause firsthand turned out to be far more daunting than I ever anticipated. My symptoms were intensely severe, and despite adhering to my family's encouragement to seek medical help, the condition showed no signs of improvement. During my hospital visits, the doctor explained that menopause doesn't have a specific cure. Instead, treatment focuses on managing symptoms. Consequently, I have been relying on a mix of prescribed medication and herbal remedies specifically chosen for their efficacy against severe symptoms. But even with these interventions, there was no cure in sight. It became increasingly challenging to continue my professional life, so 3 years ago, when I turned 50, I decided to take a leave of absence. My company's leave policy allows for up to 4 years off, and soon I'll face the tough decision of whether to return to work or retire. I'm not ready to give up my career, but the persistent severity of my symptoms is pushing me to consider retirement, a thought that fills me with frustration and uncertainty about Anthony's reaction. Initially, Anthony was empathetic and attentive when my menopausal symptoms began. He was never much for household chores, but he showed genuine concern for my well-being. I had always thought of him as a kind and caring person. However, his demeanor shifted drastically when he realized that my health issues might be long-term. He was visibly displeased when I brought up the idea of taking a temporary leave from work. "I don't understand much about your health, but is it so bad that you need a leave? You're not just slacking off and relaxing at home, right?" Anthony's skepticism was a shock to me. He mentioned that men also go through a form of menopause, perhaps trying to equate his experiences with mine. Despite having a chronic condition, Anthony rarely fell ill and managed his health meticulously to avoid exacerbating his illness. This perhaps led him to view me, who continued to struggle with health issues, as lazy. His response was always critical, no matter how extensively I explained my symptoms. "So, what's the plan to improve? If that method doesn't work, shouldn't you look for another? Why do you keep saying it's not getting better? If it's not healing, find a way to heal." His lack of understanding was apparent and disheartening. Continuing to work in my current condition was incredibly tough. When I pleaded for a leave of absence until my health stabilized, Anthony predictably became furious. However, after learning that my boss, colleagues, and juniors had encouraged me to take a break, he reluctantly agreed, though he remained displeased. Determined to contribute somehow, I did more housework while not working. Yet, there were times when my efforts to balance health and home seemed overwhelmingly challenging. When I suddenly fell ill, the challenges were almost insurmountable. Standing triggered severe dizziness, and sitting didn't alleviate the relentless sweating, likely due to my hot flashes. On days when I mustered enough strength to vacuum, merciless back pain would ensue, no matter how much medication I took or how resolutely I endured the pain to manage some household tasks. Despite my efforts, Anthony's understanding remained painfully absent. "Aren't you better yet? What's the point of going to the hospital?" he would say. Over time, his demeanor towards me grew colder. Anthony often remarked, "If you're home all day on leave, why can't you finish all the housework?" He seemed to believe my illness didn't persist from morning till night. Returning home to find dinner merely cut up and heated, he'd ask, "What are you doing at home all day?" His complaints weren't occasional. They were a regular disappointment when he came back from work. On weekends, his presence only intensified the pressure. "Stop lying down all the time. Do the laundry at least." His words stung, especially when I was lying down, feeling unwell. The sarcasm and complaints escalated daily, and the once familiar words of care and concern vanished. Amid this growing strain, I was deeply troubled by the uncertainty of whether my symptoms would ever subside. However, I found solace in the understanding and advice from my mother-in-law, Amy, and my sister-in-law, Susan, who lived nearby. Amy, still robust and lively at over 80, spoke with clarity and energy. Having outlived her husband, she lived with Susan and her husband. Both Amy and Susan had been pivotal in encouraging me to seek hospital treatment and had even suggested taking leave when my symptoms worsened. I am immensely thankful to them. Since both my parents have passed away, Amy and Susan have become my primary support system regarding my menopausal challenges. Anthony recently announced that we were going to host a dinner party for Amy's birthday the following weekend. In Anthony's family, it is a tradition to celebrate family birthdays with a large dinner party. Since marrying into the family, I have participated in these celebrations every year. Depending on the year, we either dined out or hosted the party at the in-laws' house. This year, however, the responsibility of preparing the meal for Amy's birthday at our home fell on me, with Amy and Susan expected to arrive in the evening. Susan's husband couldn't make it due to work commitments, but Anthony made it clear he expected me to be in top form for the upcoming birthday dinner. "Make sure you're in good shape on the day," he said with a stern glare, adding, "I won't tolerate a repeat of last year." I could only nod in response to his sharp tone. Last year, during Amy's birthday celebration at my in-laws' house, I felt particularly ill and couldn't attend. Anthony perceived this as a personal embarrassment and berated me harshly upon his return. The memory of his words and my pain brought tears to my eyes even now. This year, I was determined to be as well as possible, as Anthony had demanded. However, the reality was that my condition wasn't something I could simply take away. If it were, I wouldn't have been suffering for so long. With Amy turning 81, I wanted to express my gratitude for all her support through the years. I started preparing for the dinner party well in advance, committing myself fully despite my unpredictable health. There was much to do, not just cooking, but also cleaning the house thoroughly. Anthony liked to impress, and he wouldn't be satisfied unless the house was immaculate. Over several days, I cleaned every nook and cranny, monitoring my physical condition closely. Anthony, true to form, didn't lift a finger to help, preferring to relax in the living room. In his view, consistent with the attitudes of his generation, housework was the wife's responsibility. particularly since he assumed I was idle all day. The day before the party, after finishing the shopping, I went to bed early, hoping the next day would bring only mild symptoms. However, I awoke to a severe headache and dizzy spells that made even getting out of bed a struggle. My vision blurred and a violent ringing in my ears accompanied the overwhelming pain, making this bout of symptoms particularly harsh even by recent standards. I managed to get out of bed clumsily, only to hear Anthony's frustrated sigh from above. Realizing I was in no state to prepare breakfast, let alone host a dinner, he grabbed his wallet and phone, and as he headed out the door, he remarked bitterly, "I'm gonna grab some food, and since I feel sick around you." His words and the coldness in his voice cut deeply, underscoring the stark contrast between the support from Amy and Susan and the lack of empathy from my husband. The tension in the house was palpable as Anthony's words hung in the air, icy and sharp. "I'm heading to Mom's early. Make sure dinner is ready when we return," he commanded before abruptly leaving. His voice was devoid of warmth, underscoring the inconvenience his impromptu plans might have caused Amy and Susan as well. His biting comments wounded me, yet I knew I couldn't afford to dwell on them for long. I sipped on a fruit drink, took my prescribed medication, and lay down in the living room, desperately hoping for some respite. But as the afternoon wore on, my condition showed scant improvement. The medication slightly dulled the headache, but every attempt to stand sent waves of dizziness through me, causing my legs to buckle. Dinner preparation loomed large, yet my physical state stubbornly refused to cooperate. I managed only brief intervals in the kitchen, each punctuated by necessary rests, watching as time slipped by. Frustrated and nearing my limit, I attempted to contact Anthony but received no response to my calls or texts. By 6 p.m., progress was painfully inadequate. When Anthony finally returned home with Amy and Susan, he found me seated weakly in the kitchen, surrounded by my meager attempts at meal preparation. He surveyed the scene with a mix of confusion and disappointment. "No welcome for Mom? Is dinner even ready? Nothing is properly set up," he remarked, his tone laced with disapproval. I had only managed to bake some bread and assemble a modest salad, and his words felt like a sharp rebuke. Anxiety gripped me at the thought of another harsh scolding. "I'm sorry, Anthony, this is all I could manage today. Could you please order something for the main course? I'm truly sorry," I managed to say, my voice faltering under the strain. This only seemed to ignite his anger further. "Are you joking? You call this sickness an act? We were all looking forward to a nice dinner. Mom was excited, and you're letting us down again, just like last year," he exploded in anger. "You can't even manage your health properly. It's embarrassing how you drag everyone down with you," he continued, his words cutting deep without any attempt to understand. "Why didn't you pick up when I called? I even texted you to suggest we eat out, and then another text about ordering delivery. Why insist on hosting at home if you can't handle it?" I snapped back, unable to contain my frustration any longer. Each word I spoke reverberated like a blow to my head, my vision so blurred that Anthony's face was just a haze. My ears rang with my heartbeat drowning out everything else. In our heated exchange, the physical toll became apparent. I was drenched in sweat, a direct result of the oppressive heat combined with the resurgence of my symptoms, which the medication had only temporarily subdued. I regretted raising my voice, but I felt compelled to explain my condition to Anthony once I could see again. When my vision finally sharpened, I found Anthony staring at me in shocked silence, his mouth agape. Then, as our eyes met, his expression morphed into one of fury, his face turning bright red as he pointed at me accusingly. "What's with that attitude, pretending to be sick, neglecting the housework, and then snapping when called out on it? You're the worst. I'm sick of supporting a wife who fails at her responsibilities. If you can't handle the housework, maybe we should just get a divorce." His words echoed threateningly through the house, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Despite my desperate pleas, Anthony seemed resolute, bringing up divorce without a second thought. The gravity of his words nearly brought me to tears. A separation felt unavoidable. Just as I was about to reluctantly agree, I heard light footsteps approaching. Anthony, consumed by his rage, didn't notice them. He continued, his voice dripping with disdain. Menopause? Tiredness and shoulder pains, aren't those normal for our age? Dizziness and headaches can't be that bad even with medication. You just want to lie in bed all day, don't you? Before I could respond, someone tapped Anthony on the shoulder. It was Susan, my sister-in-law, displaying a level of anger I had never seen in her before. As Anthony turned, Susan raised her hand and delivered a forceful slap across his cheek. The impact sent Anthony staggering to the floor, his face a picture of disbelief as he looked up at Susan, unable to comprehend what had just happened. "What the heck are you doing, Anthony?" he asked, rubbing his cheek, still in shock. Susan fixed him with a sharp gaze. "And what about you? What's with your attitude? Have you been treating Carol like this for years? Deciding the severity of someone's illness without any medical expertise? Verbally abusing your wife? You should be ashamed."
Anthony, who typically tried to maintain a composed facade in front of the family, was visibly shaken. His behavior shifted drastically in Susan's presence. Normally dismissive and barely considerate when we were alone, he suddenly became attentive to my needs whenever Susan or other family members visited, even going so far as to make coffee himself. I had confided in Amy and Susan about my health struggles, but I had never spoken to them about how Anthony treated me behind closed doors. They were caring people, but discussing Anthony's harsh behavior felt risky. They might harbor ill will towards me for speaking ill of their relative. Even if they believed and sympathized with me, I hesitated to voice my concerns, fearing how Anthony might react if he knew I had shared our private conflicts. Seeing Susan's reaction today made me question my previous reluctance to speak out. "What's going on today is supposed to be Mom's birthday party. I wanted to make it enjoyable, but Anthony ruined the dinner by not preparing anything," Anthony said, pointing his finger at me as he stood up, eager to deflect blame. Amy, who had followed Susan into the living room, fixed Anthony with a stern gaze. "Are you saying Carol ruined the dinner party? That's just your opinion, right?" From what I've heard, Carol was doing her best to prepare despite her pain. She contacted you because it didn't seem like she could finish in time, suggesting a change of venue or ordering delivery instead. I don't appreciate being celebrated by someone unwell. I'm certainly not happy being celebrated by a son who just complains after dumping everything on his sick wife. Amy scolded him firmly. Then Susan chimed in. "Did you come to our house leaving Carol alone while she was feeling ill?" "Well, there's nothing I could do," Anthony replied defensively. "There are many things you could have done, like helping with chores or being considerate about her health. I remember telling you this when Carol first started feeling unwell. You just found it bothersome, didn't you?" Susan's words left Anthony speechless. Anthony, flustered, blurted out, "Why are Sis and Mom siding with her? Menopause isn't even a real illness. Getting tired easily, palpitations, that happens to everyone as they age. Women just want to be lazy so they can name it a disorder and pretend to be sick." Susan sighed deeply before explaining, "Anthony, you might not know, but I too suffered from severe menopause symptoms. It only recently settled down, but it was so bad I quit my job 9 years ago. Are you saying a disease that made me quit my job isn't a real illness?" Hearing this, Anthony stood frozen in shock. I had known that Susan had experienced menopausal issues around the same age as me, and that she had to resign from her job following a temporary leave. She didn't want to quit, but with no sign of recovery in sight, she had chosen to prioritize her health after consulting with her family. I remembered that Susan had stepped back from her job when she was around 50, but I hadn't known the specific reasons until she shared them herself. During that difficult time, we mostly communicated via text as she was too unwell to meet. It was a challenging period for her, and I thought about how she once confided that it felt like it would never get better. Jason, Susan's husband, who is 4 years her junior and works irregular hours, including night shifts, was always supportive of her health decisions, although he couldn't make it to the dinner. Susan turned to Anthony with a stern yet caring demeanor. "Carol is not your servant. As a husband, shouldn't you have more compassion?" Caught off guard and visibly chastened, Anthony muttered a weak apology. "Sorry, sis. I knew you were unwell, but..." His voice trailed off, finally understanding the gravity of his actions and the pain they had caused. Anthony's reply sounded like an excuse, but Susan's stern expression didn't waver. "Right now, it's not about me. Shouldn't you be apologizing to Carol?" she pressed firmly, facing pressure from Susan, whom he deeply respects and seldom contradicts. Anthony reluctantly turned towards me. After a moment, he seemed to relent. "I'm sorry. Sis scolded me and it opened my eyes. From now on, I'll help you, Carol, and we'll get along," he said, looking earnestly into my eyes. It felt like he might have finally understood. Just as I was considering forgiving Anthony, a voice cut through the moment. "Hold on a minute," said Amy, looking exhausted as she walked over supported by Susan and sat beside me on the sofa. She fixed me with a serious gaze. "Carol, you can't believe Anthony's words. You should divorce him, and quickly," she advised. "What do you mean?" I asked, taken aback by her directness. Amy then shared a bit of her past that mirrored my struggles. "I suffered from similar symptoms around your age. There wasn't a name like menopausal disorder back then, but from what you've told me, I think I probably had it too. I've told you this before, haven't I?" I nodded, recalling our previous conversations. "When I was about your age," Amy continued, "the term menopausal disorder wasn't widely recognized. There were no medications, and it was hard to find understanding from others." She chuckled sadly, then pointed at Anthony. "He used to hurl terrible abuses at me when I was suffering. It was around the time before he married you. He was living at his parents' house and would say things like, 'Make dinner faster. How long will you lie in bed, mother? Stop pretending to be sick.' Such heartless words," she recounted, her face shadowed by the painful memories. "Anthony, is that true?" I asked, hoping for some sign of denial, but Anthony awkwardly turned away, his silence confirming Amy's account. Amy looked down, sorrowfully continuing, "My late husband got so angry at Anthony's behavior back then that he hit him. When Dad scolded him severely, Anthony said the same things he's saying now." She sighed deeply. "He woke up indeed. After that, Anthony stopped saying anything to me because he quickly married you and left home. But Carol, you've been mistreated by him, haven't you? In other words, Anthony hasn't changed at all since then. He still doesn't try to understand others' illnesses, even after decades," Susan interjected, emphasizing that Anthony's current words were just excuses for the moment. "Wait a minute, I won't do it again, believe me." Anthony tried to interject, but Susan grabbed his arm to stop him. "I saw it all back then. That's why I hit you, just like Dad did. Remember how you cried and apologized to me after Dad scolded you? You said you wouldn't do it again, that you had woken up and realized your mistake," she recounted, reminding him of his past promises. Susan's stern reprimand left Anthony biting his lip in evident frustration, and as he fell silent under her gaze, Amy seized the moment to address me directly. Gripping my shoulders firmly, she spoke with urgency. "That's why you need to divorce Anthony and escape this situation quickly. Otherwise, you'll continue to suffer. Now's your chance, with me and Susan here to support you. Alone with him, he'll never admit his faults and might even resent you for embarrassing him in front of his parents." Her eyes were resolute, filled with a sad determination. Hearing such decisive words from a mother was heartbreaking, and the thought of divorce at this stage in life was daunting. Yet, Amy's recount of enduring similar mistreatment at Anthony's hands resonated deeply. I had clung to a hope that once my symptoms eased, life with Anthony could return to the happy days of our past. But the reality Amy painted was stark. Likely things would only deteriorate further. Anger and resolve welled up within me as I considered the years of verbal abuse Anthony had directed, not just at me, but at Amy too. Despite the dizziness that clouded my senses, I stood up and faced Anthony, ready to declare my intention to divorce. Shaking off Susan's restraining hand, he erupted. "What the hell are you all doing, treating me like the bad guy?" The room fell silent, the cold stares of his relatives meeting his gaze. Overcome with rage, Anthony finally blurted out, "Fine, I get it. If that's what you want, I'll give you a divorce." His concession came angrily, and the dinner party was abruptly canceled. Amy and the others left, and Anthony, unable to face the situation, stayed at a hotel. The divorce proceeded without contention over property division and was finalized swiftly. After separating, I focused on healing alone, finding solace in the peace that followed our split. Half a year later, with no prior contact, I received an unexpected call from Anthony. By then, I had moved into an apartment and was regularly visiting the hospital, feeling less stressed and noticeably healthier. His call, predictably self-centered, revealed that his chronic illness had worsened since living alone. He had always prided himself on managing his health perfectly and had often criticized me for not improving despite his claimed superiority in self-care. "Why is that happening? You can manage your health perfectly, right?" I replied, my voice tinged with irony. Anthony's idea of managing his health had been superficial at best, relying on the balanced meals I prepared without ever cooking from scratch himself. Moreover, without anyone to maintain the housework, his living conditions had deteriorated significantly, leading to a decline in his health. "I can't live like this anymore, so I want you to take care of me. It's been half a year. Your illness must be cured by now, right?" Anthony stated without a hint of remorse. He had turned to Susan and Amy first, but with Susan already caring for Amy, he was left without support. Though I wanted to refuse, remembering our long history together made it difficult to ignore him completely. "At least look at these albums I found in storage. If you don't need them, I'll throw them away," Anthony added, believing they contained old photos. Hesitant, yet curious about the memories captured in those images, including times with Amy's family, I decided to visit our former home to retrieve my belongings. Arriving at the house we had shared until just 7 months ago, I was struck by the neglect it showed. The living space was dirtier than ever, with leftover takeout containers strewn about, a clear sign of Anthony's deteriorated lifestyle. "You know, without you here, I don't have time to clean. It's hard to move," he lamented, attempting to evoke sympathy. But standing there, amidst the chaos, I realized how far I had come on my own, and how little I wanted to return to the past. During my visit to Anthony, it became evident he was making excuses. While he lamented about his illness, his demeanor suggested vitality and energy, contradicting his claims of debilitation. It dawned on me that what he sought was not so much caregiving, but rather someone to manage household tasks like cleaning, laundry, and cooking. It seemed he was in search of a caretaker rather than genuine emotional or physical support. Taking a moment to assess the situation, I addressed him directly. "You appear quite robust and healthy. Maybe it's time you stop using your condition as an excuse and start taking responsibility for yourself." This direct approach took Anthony by surprise, and his response was defensive and sharp. "You know, my condition affects my internal organs and nerves. It's not just something you can see. Offensively, you call me lazy when I'm genuinely struggling," he countered, frustration evident in his tone. Despite his argument, as he met my unwavering stare, he seemed to realize the gravity of our conversation. Suddenly pausing, he took a deep breath, and with a softer tone, he offered an apology. "I was wrong to say those harsh things when you were in pain. I'm sorry, and I promise it won't happen again. Please." I cut him off, knowing where his plea was headed. "I'm sorry, Anthony, but I can't be the one to take care of you. My health issues are still a challenge, and I can't just forget all that's happened." Anthony appeared genuinely remorseful and continued to plead, "Please, my health is unpredictable. I could end up hospitalized at any moment, and I struggle with managing my diet and medication without help. I need you. While his words tugged at my heartstrings, Amy's earlier warnings echoed in my mind. His repentance could very well be a tactic to win sympathy. With this in mind, I gently yet firmly rejected his request. I'm already dealing with a lot on my own. The stress of being back in a caretaking role could set back my recovery. If you need assistance, some services and professionals can provide the support you need. I just can't be that person for you. Resolute in my decision, I returned to my own life. In the time since, I have managed to find a new equilibrium. My health has improved significantly, and I have returned to my professional life after a necessary break. While retirement was once a consideration, supporting myself and finding fulfillment in my work has brought a new sense of purpose. Though I no longer have any romantic ties to Anthony, I maintain a cordial relationship with his family, occasionally joining them for meals. The regular family gatherings, once a cornerstone of interaction, have ceased since our split. Rumor has it that Anthony has left his job under the pretense of focusing on his health. Though no tangible improvements have been noted, he seems to be relying on his early retirement savings, facing his days with a mix of resignation and apprehension about his health's uncertain trajectory. As for me, I remain committed to nurturing my well-being and embracing the peaceful independence of my new life. Hello, everyone. My name is Isabella, and I am about to celebrate my 29th birthday this year. It's been 4 years since I married my husband, Larry, who is 2 years older than me. Our son, Roger, recently turned 3. Initially, I was working full-time, but after Roger's arrival, I shifted to a part-time role at the same company to better balance family life. Larry, from the beginning, was quite forward in our dating phase, but I've noticed a more dominant side to him since we married. Larry has a younger sister, Rachel, who is a decade younger than him at 22 years old. Their significant age difference seems to foster a particularly indulgent attitude from Larry towards her. Before we were married, Rachel's regular visits didn't bother me. I thought it was nice how well they got along. However, after marriage, I started to see changes in her behavior. Rachel often arrives at our home unannounced and expects to be catered to, rarely bringing anything to show her appreciation. Whenever these situations arise, Larry expects me to serve her without question. Rachel often treats me as if I'm invisible, speaking only to Larry with a casual, "Hey brother, I'm here again." Despite not planning for an extra guest, I find myself serving dinner to Rachel. Larry, instead of showing understanding, criticizes me in front of her, insisting that I should have been more thoughtful. Even though Rachel offers verbal apologies, it's clear she enjoys the preferential treatment from Larry. After they finish eating, they leave the dining table a mess and continue chatting on the sofa, largely ignoring both Roger and me, treating us more like staff than family. One evening, just as Roger and I were about to take a bath, Larry loudly interrupted, instructing me to go out and buy a gâteau for Rachel because she wanted it immediately despite the late hour. Feeling under pressure, I reluctantly agreed to go to the gâteau shop with Roger in tow. While we were out, I overheard Larry and Rachel criticizing me for being inconsiderate and even questioning Larry's decision to marry me. Roger, not fully understanding their words, still sensed the tension. To lighten the mood, I asked Roger about his preference for the gâteau, and he excitedly chose one loaded with fruits. Our conversation about gâteau on the way to the shop helped distract us from the earlier discomfort. We arrived just in time before the shop closed and managed to find the specific gâteau Rachel wanted. We also picked up the fruit-laden gâteau Roger was excited about. Despite the challenges at home, moments like these with Roger helped me navigate the complexities of our family dynamics. After serving the gâteau to Rachel and Larry, I prepared Roger's special gâteau with strawberries on top and brought it to the dining room. The moment I set it down in front of him, Rachel pointed at it, expressing her desire for that particular gâteau. Before I could even respond, Larry took the gâteau from Roger and placed it in front of Rachel,
Disregarding Roger's protests, Larry justified his actions by saying he had paid for the gâteau with his own money and therefore had the right to decide who got which gâteau. My emotions overwhelmed me and I couldn't hold back any longer. I expressed my dissatisfaction loudly. In response, Larry threatened me with divorce. Roger, who had been crying, anxiously grabbed my hand and tried to lighten the mood by saying, "Mom, I also love gâteau with strawberries on it. It's delicious," as he ate a piece of the gâteau originally intended for Rachel. Feeling that Roger was suffering too much, I quickly lifted his plate when I saw Rachel reaching for his gâteau again. I took him to the next room where he could enjoy his gâteau in peace. In the other room, Larry apologized to Rachel, regretting his stinginess. Despite wanting to speak out, I refrained, choosing to prioritize Roger's well-being. Watching Roger happily eating his gâteau in the next room was a heartwarming sight. After finishing his gâteau, we decided to take a late bath and then sleep in Roger's bed. The next morning, I found out that Rachel had left early. As I was preparing breakfast, I heard Roger crying. Shockingly, his piggy bank, a cherished gift from my father, was broken, and the money he had saved was gone. Roger, who always said goodnight to his piggy bank, was devastated. When I confronted Larry about it, he nonchalantly mentioned that Rachel needed some cash, so she took it from the piggy bank. Holding a crying and trembling Roger, I felt his pain so deeply that I cried along with him. It was excruciating to see Larry prioritizing his sister over our son. Driven by anger and sadness, I confronted Larry more directly than ever before, breaking my usual practice of avoiding arguments in front of Roger. Larry, without saying a word, went to the bedroom and returned with something shocking in his hands: divorce papers. I was stunned to discover the hidden divorce papers that Larry had secretly prepared. In a sudden burst of anger, he thrust the papers at me before storming out of the house, the door slamming loudly behind him. As I stood there holding Roger, I realized the depth of the challenges we faced as a family. Roger, who had always remained stoic about the issues with Larry and Rachel, finally reached his breaking point, crying since the previous night. Unable to bear seeing him so distressed, I suggested we skip daycare for the day. His response was a loud, enthusiastic "yes," accompanied by a faint smile. It was clear he needed this day as much as I did, so we dedicated it to playing and bonding. Roger, beaming with joy, pulled a picture book from the shelf and climbed into my lap, declaring, "Today, Mama is the teacher at the nursery, right?" His innocent remark and angelic expression warmed my heart, and I decided to make the day even more special by taking the day off from work. Despite the potential inconvenience it could cause at my workplace, my colleagues were understanding and granted me a day off. In the morning, we visited the park where we played hide and seek and had fun with the sandbox and slide. When we returned home for lunch, Roger was visibly sleepy. Normally, he would nap by himself, but today he fell asleep in my lap like he did when he was a baby. Initially, I thought about using the time to catch up on household chores, but I decided against it. Today was about cherishing these peaceful moments with Roger, so I let myself be healed by his serene, sleeping face and gentle breathing. However, this serene moment was abruptly interrupted by the sound of the front door opening, which was unusual since it wasn't Larry's typical time to come home. Alarmed, I quickly scooped up Roger and hid in the bedroom closet. Through the thin walls, I heard a voice. It was Rachel. My heart raced as I listened to her rummaging through the house, muttering in frustration about not finding something. She then made a phone call mentioning Larry and discussing their failed search. After she locked the front door and left, I quietly put Roger to bed and sat down, bewildered by the day's events. The realization that Larry and Rachel might be conspiring left me feeling betrayed and fearful. In a whirlwind of emotions, I swiftly packed essentials for Roger and me. We then headed to the train station and took a train to my parents' house, which was thankfully only 3 stops away. I hadn't informed them of our arrival, but the concern in my eyes was enough for them to understand something was wrong. They welcomed us warmly, no questions asked. Settling into the safety of my parents' home, I shared the entire ordeal with them, including my fear of returning to our house because of Larry and Rachel's unsettling behavior. The safety and understanding provided by my parents offered a temporary refuge from the storm brewing back at home. Upon my mother's speculation that Rachel might have been searching for my personal belongings, possibly cash or cards, I was prompted to think back on my earlier career successes. Before marriage, I had been the CEO of a thriving handmade goods company, a role I had passed on to trusted friends so I could focus more on raising my child while still working part-time from home. Unbeknownst to Larry, I had retained my position as CEO and maintained a level of financial independence that he was unaware of. My discovery of the hidden divorce papers Larry had stashed away made me suspect that he believed I possessed substantial savings. While I had mentioned to him that the company still provided me some financial support, I had deliberately omitted details about my role as CEO and the extent of my savings. This secrecy was born from my early realization that Larry was poor at managing finances and tended to spend all he earned. Initially, Larry had contributed a minimal amount for our monthly food expenses and even suggested I quit working to become a full-time housewife. Given the financial demands of raising Roger and the meager food budget, I never agreed to stop working. Eventually, Larry grudgingly accepted my decision to continue working part-time.
Since Roger's birth, I've been using my savings to cover his nursery fees and clothing because the monthly food budget from Larry was inadequate. I never requested additional funds from Larry, reinforcing his mistaken belief that I had ample savings. Considering Rachel's apparent need for money and Larry's misconceptions about my financial situation, it seemed plausible they were searching for my cash cards. To safeguard against any potential financial intrusions, I have a separate savings account for Roger, into which a portion of my salary is directly deposited each month. Despite their attempts, they wouldn't find any cash cards as I always keep my valuables with me. However, the ongoing issue of Rachel's unauthorized entries into our home, potentially facilitated by Larry, remained deeply troubling. Following my father's advice, I decided to secure my valuables, including the cash cards, in my parents' safe. While I was pondering over their motivations for needing money, Roger approached my father, tears in his eyes, distraught over his broken piggy bank. This incident not only highlighted the immediate financial invasion, but also the emotional toll it was taking on my son. The news of Roger's broken piggy bank and his lost savings deeply upset my father, who was incensed by the story and vowed to confront Larry. My mother, however, suggested a more measured approach, finding out their motives first, as any rash accusations could potentially make us look guilty in the eyes of the law, potentially swinging the outcome of a divorce in Larry's favor. To better understand their intentions, I decided to secretly record their conversations. I consulted a lawyer who was a friend of my father's before heading back to our home. That evening, as I started to prepare dinner, I strategically placed my phone, screen down, on the kitchen counter to record discreetly. Larry came home earlier than expected and immediately began questioning me about my cash cards. His questions were probing, and when I responded with silence, his demeanor grew increasingly agitated. He demanded that I hand over the money I earned from my part-time job to support his sister. Refusing, I clarified that the money was meant for Roger's savings. In a burst of anger, Larry shoved the signed divorce papers towards me, accusing me of living off his money and claiming there was no need for me to save for Roger. His harsh words even suggested that he valued Rachel more than our son. Hearing this, I stopped cooking, grabbed the divorce papers, took Roger by the hand, and headed for the door. Larry's voice boomed behind us, declaring his serious intent for a divorce and instructing me never to come back. I responded firmly, stating I would not return to a home where strangers could freely enter and leave. Once outside, I received numerous messages and calls from Larry, which I chose to ignore, turning off my phone to seek refuge at my parents' house. There, I shared the recording and the divorce papers with my parents. Although I confessed to having no love or affection left for Larry, my primary concern remained for Roger. My parents supported whatever decision I felt was best, acknowledging the potential emotional impact a divorce might have on Roger. As we discussed these heavy topics, Roger, unaware of the depth of the situation, mentioned he was hungry. Seeing my distress, my mother kindly stepped in to make burgers, his favorite meal. Overwhelmed with emotions and the supportive environment my parents provided, tears welled up in my eyes as my mother served Roger his burgers with a warm, reassuring smile. As my mother prepared burgers, Roger and I were reminded that we could always find comfort and joy here with family. Taking a big bite, Roger's eyes lit up with delight. He praised his grandma's cooking, wishing he could have her burgers every day. Smiling, I told him that the secret ingredient was the love we all shared for him. In a heartwarming gesture, Roger took another large bite and then offered it to me. His simple act of sharing was so touching that it brought tears to my eyes. Despite my efforts to hold them back, the tears kept coming. Noticing Roger's concern, my father reassured him that my tears were tears of happiness, not sadness. Understanding this, Roger hugged me tightly, and I saw my father's eyes brim with emotion, reflecting the deep value of family moments like these. In this comforting family setting, I explained to Roger how precious family truly is. Surprised, he asked if Dad thought that only Rachel was considered family. My father gently confirmed this was not the case and asked Roger if he would like to live with us as a family. With a joyful laugh, Roger happily agreed, bringing smiles to everyone's faces. Amidst these tender family interactions, the warmth and support made me realize that it was time to part ways with Larry. The decision was tough, and the thought of discussing divorce weighed heavily on my heart. However, Roger seemed to intuitively understand the need for change, expressing his wish to continue living as a true family here, even playfully calling our older pet dog his younger brother. The next day, we began formalizing the divorce proceedings by contacting a lawyer who was a friend of my father. As we set the legal wheels in motion, my father and Roger shared comforting laughs that lightened the atmosphere, while I spent moments in bed reflecting on my childhood and the strength I had gained from my family. Upon checking my smartphone the following day, I found it overwhelmed with over 180 calls and messages from Larry, revealing his emotional turmoil. Exhausted by the barrage and needing clarity, I turned off my phone. With the lawyer's help, we explained the entire situation to my parents. It came to light that Rachel had accumulated significant debt due to a gambling and shopping addiction, adding another layer of complexity to the already strained family dynamics. Larry had assumed the role of guarantor for Rachel, secretly planning to use my savings to cover her debts. The lawyer informed us that the divorce papers had already been submitted, and Larry, overwhelmed by the reality of the situation, broke down when he realized the divorce was finalized. Despite anticipating disagreements over child support, he agreed to pay $405 each month for Roger's upkeep. In a later conversation, Larry's tone was markedly less aggressive. He calmly admitted to his financial manipulations and shared his complicated feelings about his responsibilities towards Rachel. I firmly stood by my decision to move forward without reconsideration, and hearing his faint sobbing just before he wished me happiness and ended the call. Remaining resolute, I discussed future plans with my parents and decided it would be best for Roger and me to stay with them until he was older. I resumed my full-time role as president of the company, reaffirming my commitment to a stable and secure future for myself and my son.
Later, I learned that Larry and Rachel had explained the situation of the divorce and Rachel's debts to their parents, which led to their disownment by their family. Today, I find immense joy and peace in being surrounded by my loving family, far removed from the tumult of my past with Larry.
Greetings, my name is Patricia and I am 48 years old. I live with my husband and mother-in-law in a well-connected suburb near the train station, offering excellent access to the city center. When we were house hunting, Ethan, who had just been promoted to a managerial position, insisted on a spacious apartment despite the high rent. The extra space seemed worth the cost. Ethan, 6 years my senior and a divorcee, was introduced to me by a friend. His mature, comforting presence was something I had quickly come to rely on. We decided to get married after 3 years of dating. Even when I shared with him my infertility due to past illness, his affection never faltered. My feelings for him remained strong even after I learned about his previous marriage and his son, Willie, whom he had from that relationship. "I'm truly sorry to ask you to live with my parents and son," Ethan had said. "I promise I won't let you suffer. I'll make sure you're happy." To give me space and prevent me from feeling suffocated, he suggested moving to this large apartment where I could have my room. Willie, who was turning 9 that year, would not need much care, especially with his grandmother around to help. After his divorce, Ethan's parents helped with childcare until his father tragically passed away in an accident, leaving his mother to take over as Willie's caretaker. From our very first meeting, Willie had barely made eye contact with me. Initially, I attributed Willie's reserved demeanor to his age and possible shyness, so I didn't let it bother me too much. As long as the family accepted me, I felt content to be a part of their household. My mother-in-law, a woman of quiet elegance, had shown me such politeness during my formal introduction post-engagement that I believed we could coexist peacefully. She had set clear expectations from the start. I'll continue to prepare the meals as usual. Ethan often comes home late, so it's okay if we eat at different times, right, Patricia? I'll leave the cleaning and laundry to you. Let's work well together, she had said. After marrying, I shifted from full-time to part-time at the pharmacy to manage the household chores more effectively. My new schedule meant I wouldn't get home until nearly 9:05 p.m., but dinner was always ready, a small comfort in my solo dining routine. My mother-in-law and Willie usually ate before I arrived, reinforcing a sense of isolation even within my married life. Initially, I wondered if this was all there was to family life, but gradually, I accepted this as just our way. Despite our seemingly smooth start, it became clear that my mother-in-law never truly liked me or considered me a part of the family. Trying to build a relationship with Willie, I asked about his school activities. "Willie, the school's activity day is before summer, right? When is it? We're all going to see you, aren't we?" Before he could answer, my mother-in-law quickly intervened. "We'll go there, just Ethan and me, Patricia. You don't need to worry about it." Misunderstanding her intention as considerate, I persisted. "I can get the day off work. Let's all go together." But she dismissed me sharply. "You don't need that. You're Ethan's wife, and Mix's family has always been just Ethan and me." Her words stunned me. That night, I expressed my shock to Ethan, who explained, "Mom's been clinging to Willie. She probably thinks you're trying to take him away. I'll talk to her." Over time, I managed to join them at the activity day, attempting to integrate as a mother figure, but Willie and I rarely interacted outside of these school events. Sometimes I sensed he wanted to open up, but my mother-in-law invariably interjected, blocking progress. I later discovered she had been tarnishing my image of Willie, suggesting I'd be happier if he weren't in the picture. This revelation deeply hurt me, highlighting the complexities and challenges of blending into a family with pre-existing bonds and hidden resentments. The accusations were harsh. "She's a terrible person. Dad must be deceived by her, too." Hearing such negative things from my mother-in-law must have influenced Willie during his impressionable teenage years.
It was no wonder he grew distant from me. The situation was disheartening, and until then, I had never imagined she could be so manipulative. By the time Willie graduated from high school, he was eager to leave. He moved in with his girlfriend immediately and departed for college soon after. Within a year of starting his career, he married her quietly and simply without any formal ceremony. Once Willie was gone, my mother-in-law's behavior took a turn for the worse. Surprisingly, she ceased all housework, which had been a regular part of her daily routine. It seemed as though her new pastime was to find fault with me.
She stopped cooking, something she previously took pride in, and would sit at the dining table, waiting for me to return from work. The moment I stepped into the kitchen to prepare our meal, the criticisms began. "You're inefficient. At this rate, it'll take you all night," she'd scoff. Admittedly, I was never skilled at cooking, mainly because I had relied on her for meals. Whenever I did manage to cook, she critiqued every dish relentlessly. "This tastes awful," she would say as she grimaced. "I'm sorry, I'm trying my best," I would respond, only to hear her retort, "You're astonishingly tone-deaf when it comes to flavors, Patricia. It's a good thing Willie never had to eat this." If she disliked it so much, I thought she might as well cook herself. But it seemed her goal was merely to berate me. Her complaints weren't limited to my cooking. She began to nitpick everything I did, from the chores I wasn't accustomed to handling, like cleaning, to the laundry. "Why are there so many wrinkles on the laundry? You have to vacuum every nook and cranny. You really can't do anything right. Didn't your family teach you anything?" These jabs at my upbringing were especially painful. She would sigh, looking at me disdainfully, and say, "I don't know how you won over Ethan, but I can't see much charm in you as a woman." And she always concluded with the same hurtful line, "If you hadn't come along, Willie would have never left." I realized that her heart was aching from Willie's absence, perhaps a case of empty nest syndrome. I told myself that if venting her frustrations on me helped her cope, I should just bear it. But her antagonism intensified after a particular event, the announcement of Willie's wife, Teresa, being pregnant. The joy she showed was unlike anything I had seen before. "It's Willie's baby. It's bound to be adorable. He'll be my first grandchild," she exclaimed with genuine happiness. Watching their elation, I found a small piece of joy for myself too. Despite the ongoing challenges at home, the excitement of my mother-in-law over the impending arrival of her great-grandchild was nothing short of overwhelming. The catalyst for her exuberance came when Willie inquired if his wife, Teresa, could have their baby at our place, given her family was an hour away by plane and they lacked local support. My mother-in-law, thrilled to be asked, immediately agreed to help, unable to contain her joy at being needed. Her preparations began almost immediately. Calls from Willie became a daily occurrence, each one sending her excitement soaring even higher. She dove into tasks with fervor, clearing out Willie's old room, organizing the space for the baby, and meticulously planning everything from the nursery decor to the baby supplies needed. She enlisted my help the moment I got home from work. "Patricia, I've taken care of the vacuuming in Willie's room. Could you handle wiping down the floors and the windows, and make sure to wax them too?" she instructed with an air of urgency. "This weekend we're off to buy a crib," she added as if it was the most natural plan for our weekend. Juggling these tasks late into the night after my shifts was grueling. Any attempt to shortcut the process was met with a stern command to start over. It wasn't long before her requests extended to finances. "Patricia, I need you to withdraw some money tomorrow. There are a few more things I want to pick up for the baby," she declared one morning. I hesitated, concerned by the rapid pace of spending. Shouldn't we wait for Teresa and Willie to arrive before we buy so much? Maybe Teresa would like to choose some things herself, I suggested, hoping to inject some practicality into the frenzy. Her response was sharp and dismissive. "How can you be so detached? It's Ethan's grandchild after all." "Oh, but of course you're not related by blood. You wouldn't understand, would you?" she retorted, her words laced with accusation. I tried to clarify my position gently. "It's not that I don't care. I just thought it might be nice for Teresa to have a say in her own child's preparations," I explained. My attempt to reason with her seemed to hit a nerve, and she looked at me with a piercing glare. Realizing I may have crossed a line, I watched helplessly as she turned and retreated to her room, deeply upset. I spent that night reflecting on the harsh exchange, feeling the weight of her words. The following morning, she stayed in her room, likely still angry about our conversation. Ethan was about to leave on a business trip and paused at her door to make a final remark. "I'm heading out. Don't dampen Mom's enthusiasm about the grandchild. She's been different since Willie moved out. You've noticed it too, right?" I nodded, but added, "However, if we use up all our funds now, what will we do when Willie and Teresa need our help?" Ethan frowned, misunderstanding my concern. "Are you suggesting I don't make enough money?" "That's not it at all," I quickly assured him, but it was too late. He left, visibly upset, and I was left alone to ponder the delicate balance of family dynamics and financial responsibility. As the one managing our household finances for over 12 years, I considered it prudent to think ahead. Ethan had always reassured me that my part-time income was for my use, so I diligently saved whatever I didn't spend, viewing it as a shared resource for our future needs. The financial stability of our household had been deteriorating steadily. Over the past 4 years, Ethan's salary had shrunk to 2/3 of what it was when we first got married, due to his company's declining performance. Despite the uncertainty about the company's future and his job security until retirement, Ethan was reluctant to look for a new job. He was unwilling to relinquish his role as a department head, mostly to maintain appearances in front of my mother-in-law. As a result, I took on the responsibility of paying our rent, while Ethan managed the other living expenses. We kept this arrangement hidden from my mother-in-law to preserve Ethan's dignity. One day, feeling the weight of recent tensions, I decided to leave work early to apologize to my mother-in-law. When I arrived home, she was already seated at the dining table, waiting. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I may have been too harsh," I began, but she cut me off with her icy demeanor, delivering startling news. "Willie and Teresa are coming back to have their baby here. I need you to move out," she stated bluntly. Stunned, I barely managed to ask, "I have to leave?" She confirmed, "Yes, we don't need another mother figure. You've been redundant for a while now. Willie and his family will be living here. Make sure you're out by tomorrow." Her words hit me like a truck. I had never felt fully accepted by the family, always the outsider. Now, with Willie's return for the birth, it was clear. "Your barren failure," she continued mercilessly. "You were allowed to experience raising a child. Be grateful for that. We have no obligation to support you anymore. It seems Ethan is tired of you, too. Maybe he's getting along well with a new girlfriend by now." Shocked and heartbroken, I grabbed my bag and left the house, wandering to calm my shaken spirit. I tried calling Ethan, despite my mother-in-law's insinuations. He didn't answer, no matter how many times I dialed. I even called his office, only to find out he had taken a few days off. The suspicions seated by my mother-in-law started to seem more plausible. Overwhelmed with emotion and tears streaming down my face, I found myself in front of the pub near the station, a place Ethan and I used to frequent when we first moved here. It still stood, a relic of happier times. As I entered, the pub owner's face clouded with concern before he recognized me. "Hey, long time no see. It's been about 6 years," I remarked, trying to muster a smile amidst my distress. "Yes, it's been a while. I remember you," he replied, offering a nod of recognition that brought a brief sense of relief. "Can I get a beer and a mixed plate of charbroiled chicken?" I asked, seeking a small comfort in this familiar place, a refuge from the storm swirling through my life. As I sat at the familiar pub,
I engaged in light conversation with the owner, a man of few words. Sipping my cold beer and savoring the charbroiled chicken, I pulled out my cell phone. The screen lit up, displaying a photo of Ethan and me taken on Willie's 17th birthday. He looked dashing in the slim suit we had chosen together, and I remembered wishing for a closer family bond. The beer seemed to wash down the day's troubles, and as I contemplated my next steps, I browsed for moving companies, finding one available for the next day. I also bookmarked a couple of junk removal services, saving their contacts in my favorites. Changing the screensaver on my phone to something less personal, I felt a sense of mental clarity returning. The meal tasted exceptionally good, perhaps a small comfort amid the chaos. I decided to give the situation more thought once I was back home. As I walked away from the pub, a young waitress hurried towards me. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Patricia?" she asked, noting the screensaver before I had changed it. Confirming my identity, she hesitated before dropping a bombshell. She believed my husband was having an affair with one of their employees. We exchanged contact details and she promised to keep me updated. The pieces began to fit together, validating the harsh words of my mother-in-law. Instead of feeling sad, a fierce anger surged within me. It was time to confront this head-on. That evening, I contacted the moving company and resolved to leave the next day. If there was no conspiracy and my mother-in-law and Willie were indeed plotting against me, I no longer felt obliged to maintain appearances. I packed my belongings relentlessly until midnight. The movers arrived promptly the next morning, and I instructed them to take everything I had purchased, intending to erase any trace of my presence. My mother-in-law was taken aback by my resolve. "I'm taking everything I bought. You can start fresh tomorrow," I declared, barely suppressing a laugh despite her protests. The movers efficiently cleared out my items, leaving behind only the baby gear and her old dresser, things from before my time. "Well then, I bid you farewell. There should be no trace of me left, so enjoy your new life with Ethan, Willie, and his family," I said coolly, leaving her stunned. Placing the keys on the table, I exited the house, the movers following with my belongings. I decided to stay with a colleague temporarily, feeling a sense of completion and relief. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months. 2 weeks later, Ethan finally reached out, his voice tinged with confusion and urgency. "Patricia, where are you? Willie and his family are here. Aren't you coming home soon?" "No, I'm not coming back," I responded firmly, recalling his mother's command for me to leave. Meanwhile, the young waitress from the pub had followed through on her promise, sending me a photo of Ethan chatting intimately with another woman at the pub and later entering a hotel with her. This betrayal erased any remaining affection I had for him. Armed with evidence of the affair, I prepared to confront the situation fully, no longer bound by any illusions of my old life. Having had enough, I didn't hesitate to make it clear to Ethan over the phone. "Willie and his family are moving in with you, right?" "I figured as much. I heard they've been struggling financially, hopping between part-time jobs since Willie graduated from vocational school." "No, I want you back, Patricia," Ethan replied, his voice edged with desperation. "I went to the pharmacy and they said you're taking some time off." "Yeah, I needed a break," I said nonchalantly. "But I'm fine, so don't worry about me. Your mom and Willie probably prefer having the house to themselves without me around." My blunt remark left Ethan speechless. He knew all too well that his mother and Willie had never accepted me, but he chose to ignore it. "All right, I need to talk, so I'll come back there," he said, a plea evident in his tone. A few days later, I returned to the house for the first time since leaving. Inside, I noticed new furniture and appliances. Willie and Teresa barely acknowledged my presence, merely nodding from their seats on the sofa without standing. As I sat down, my mother-in-law glared at me with a mix of shock and disdain. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Before I could rush my visit and leave, Willie confronted me. "What are you doing here? You took everything from the house. What kind of monster does that?" Dad's been supporting you and you've had it easy. I exhaled deeply, frustrated. I took everything because I paid for it. I was clearing out all traces of myself just as you all wanted, right? I countered. That's crazy. There's no way you could afford all that just working part-time at the pharmacy, Ethan chimed in. Turning to face him, I replied firmly, We've been getting by on what both Ethan and I earn, and for your information, Ethan's company hasn't been doing well. His salary has dropped significantly, and for the past 4 years, I've been the one covering the shortfall. I've been paying our rent. My mother-in-law's face registered shock as she turned to look at Ethan, who awkwardly avoided her gaze. I'm not just a part-timer, I'm a druggist, and the pay is quite good. I make more than Ethan now. The room went silent, the tension palpable. Turning to Willie, I decided it was time for some truths. Since you're going to live here now, it's time for you to start taking responsibility. You'll be paying the rent to help your grandmother. Willie's face contorted in surprise. Rent? How much is it? It's $7,200, I said firmly. Good luck. Since it seems my role here is over, I have no obligation to take care of you anymore.
You're going to be a father soon, Willie. It's time to pull yourself together. Teresa, overhearing the conversation, suddenly spoke up, her voice tinged with panic. Wait, $7,200? Weren't we supposed to live here for free? I stood up, ready to leave, satisfied that I had made my point clear. Covering rent and living expenses is part of life. Good luck figuring it out. As I walked out, leaving them to absorb the new reality, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The chapter of my life dominated by neglect and ungratefulness was finally closed. I almost burst out laughing at the absurdity of the situation, but managed to keep my composure. Don't worry, Teresa, there are cheaper places available. Ethan still makes a decent salary after all, I remarked, watching her face relax slightly. Then, with a heavy dose of sarcasm, I added, Oh, and since I'll be leaving, life might still get tough for you, Ethan, especially with your mistress, huh? At that, Teresa's composure broke, and she dissolved into tears. My husband looked panicked. What are you talking about? He stammered. Teresa, through her tears, responded, Oh, your mother told me about the new woman. I guess it's time to end my role as a wife, too. Ethan was flustered. My mother said what? He sputtered, realizing too late that I knew far more than he wished I did. It hasn't even been 6 days since I left the house, Ethan. Wouldn't that hurt Grace if she knew? I mused aloud, and at the mention of Grace's name, Ethan's face went pale, confirming my suspicions. This isn't the right atmosphere to discuss divorce papers, but I'll be in touch about that later through my lawyer, I declared, standing up to leave. Neither Ethan nor Willie could find the words to respond. They remained silent as I grabbed my bag. My mother-in-law, however, stood up abruptly, slamming her hands on the table and yelling with a vigor surprising for her age, What the hell? It's all your fault our home is in shambles. I shot back without hesitation. It was you who told me to leave, you who hinted at Ethan's affair, and you who interfered with my relationship with Willie. Everything was because of you. I felt a rush of anger. I regretted not being more assertive in my relationship with Willie and not standing up to her sooner. Willie has nothing to do with this. Ethan, it's time for you to step up. You're going through a hard time. You should support him as his wife. Take responsibility as a family member, I admonished. What is she even talking about? My mother-in-law muttered, bewildered. If she hadn't called Willie back home, if she hadn't hinted at Ethan's affair, I would still be supporting Ethan in this home. Where are you, Willie? Why are you still here? It's all her fault, my mother-in-law concluded, her lips pressed tightly together, trembling with emotion. I slipped past the silent mother-in-law and quickly left the room. Afterward, Ethan agreed to the divorce rather easily. It seemed my determination and the undeniable evidence of the affair gave him no other choice. Shortly after, it seemed they began the process of moving out of the apartment. In the end, Willie and Teresa returned to their apartment, choosing not to live with the mother-in-law. Ethan appears to be considering remarriage, but Grace is furious over the alimony and his request for her to live with his mother. I've heard they're now considering what steps to take next. After everything that transpired, my mother-in-law ended up in a care facility. It's somewhat melancholy to reflect on the irony of her situation. After all the dedication she poured into raising her son and caring for her grandson, it seems they are now ready to move on without her. Perhaps, in their eyes, she had fulfilled her role. If my mother-in-law had held her tongue back then, and if it had merely been a simple return home for childbirth, perhaps we could have continued living together even after the divorce. But things unfolded differently. Willie sent me an apology letter recently. In it, he expressed his childhood longing for more affection and explained that he couldn't talk to me freely because his grandmother disapproved. He also shared how pleased he was whenever I attended his school events. Reading his words, I wondered if maybe I should have made more effort to connect with him. Maybe then, our relationship could have taken a different path. Despite the end of our familial ties, I find myself silently hoping for Willie's happiness in life. As for me, I've returned to my job as a druggist and rented an apartment close to my workplace. I didn't feel right keeping the furniture and appliances I had taken from the house, so I arranged for a junk removal service to take them away. Life without the constant criticism and interference of my mother-in-law has turned out to be peaceful and comfortable. For now, I am focused on living for my happiness, no longer beholden to fulfilling someone else's expectations or desires. It's a new chapter, one where I can finally breathe freely and look forward to what comes next.